So let's start with why were if they had a penitential component to it, there was obviously a military intervention and called for by the Pope. I think those were the, why were they waged?
Why were the Crusades waged? There's another English historian who's given a very nice, short, concise answer to that. The Crusades were the long-term result of the rise of Islam, because they are defensive expeditions in response to Islamic invasion.
Yeah, so a reaction to a provocation.
Very much so.
Yeah.
Yes.
But they've been given a very bad historical rap, right?
Yes, unfortunately.
And why is that?
There are complex reasons for that. A lot of it, I think, goes back to Western self-hatred, really. A rejection of what the Christian West stood for, and therefore a rejection of the Christian West's right to defend itself.
Perhaps some of your professors at Wisconsin upheld that view.
I would say that it's complicated, though, by the fact that the Reformation really represents a line of demarcation. Because up until the Reformation in the 1500s, there really was a broad consensus among Christians that what was happening was entirely justifiable on moral grounds through the natural law and as biblical grounds, precisely because they're defensive wars. You know, at one point, Islam had basically taken 2/3 of Christendom.
That's right.
And so, you know, it was a slow reaction, but it was an understandable action. And I think Luther, because the Pope called for it, targeted that and said that this was really, you know, to extend the tyranny of the papacy. And that's when the questioning began. And then, of course, the Enlightenment represents an even more disruption, you know, a greater disruption.
Yes, very much so.
And so, today we've got from Luther and the Reformation, Enlightenment, all the way through to modern scholars and throughout, really casting aspersions and settling a lot of misinformation.
But you know, if you zero in on the middle of 1500s as a kind of flashpoint, or maybe the 1400s, the great primatial seas of Christendom have all been co-opted by Islam.
Except for
Jerusalem, Alexandria, Antioch, and then Constantinople. Only Rome stands.
Only Rome. That's
and you would think that the impulse to rally round Rome would be almost irresistible.
Well, there was an impulse to do that, and even after the Reformation, that impulse, there was a kind of echo of that impulse in 1571 after the Battle of Lepanto, which was won by an allied fleet, Venetians, papal forces, Spanish forces, I think. The church bells in England, then Protestant England, were rung in celebration after Lepanto. But then that was followed by the Spanish Armada. Yes.
And even Luther changed his mind when Austria was being threatened by Muslims. At that point, it's no longer Rome, and it's not the Pope. It's getting close to
Don Juan of Austria was the great champion of Luther in that particular naval battle.
The champion of the Catholic side. Yes, he very much was.
He secured a Christendom for the West.
It should be said that during the Middle Ages there were people that objected to the Crusades, not so much because they didn't think, well, not at all because they didn't think Christendom should be defended, but because they thought it was the wrong approach.
A tactic or strategy.
It was the wrong tactic. The great Catalan thinker Ramon Llull, for example, wavered back and forth between arguing in favor of Crusades sometimes and in favor of missions activities at other times, and in the end of his life, he was 81, I think, he went himself to North Africa as a missionary, saying this is what we should do to combat Islam. And what happened was he got his skull staved by stones.
There's an interesting parallel when you consider the Dominicans. They were founded in order precisely to win back the Albigensians in southern France. But that particular crusade came to a crashing halt when these wonderful friars walk into these Albigensian villages to preach and to pray, and by example and exhortation win them back to Rome. They're simply ignored.
They're ignored, and therefore force had to be used.
Yeah, the secular arm had to step in.
The Albigensian Crusade is an interesting case study for crusading. The church gets criticized for having used force against the Albigensians, against the Cathars. But in fact, there was a canonical reason why they needed to do it, and do it quickly. According to canon law, at least at the time, and I think now still, you're not considered a heretic if you are not the person who instigated the defective beliefs. And the people who had instigated the beliefs, that generation was about to die off. So the church was about to be in a position where it couldn't do anything about it.